A number of years ago, my family, I decided that we were going to buy one of those pools, those Intex pools. You've seen them, you set it up and tear it down every year. And we bought one of those pools. It was blue with one of those rubber rings on the top of it. So as long as that ring stayed inflated, that pool would hold about 4,500 gallons of water. So one morning I walked outside to check on the pool, do my normal pool boy stuff, make sure the chemicals are all right and all that kind of good stuff. And so I'm checking on the pool and I walk out and I notice the water level had come way down. I mean, way down. I'm like, where'd all my water go? So I figured there must be a leak. I walk around the pool and sure enough, there was a tiny hole in the side of the pool where the water was kind of streaming out. So I grab my patch repair kit and I bring it back out and I get the patch on the wall of the pool and fill the water back up in the pool and everything was good. Till the next day, same thing. I come out to do my normal pool boy routine. I get out there and the water's coming out again and it's like half empty. Can't figure it out. Walk around the pool. There's the leak. Another leak had sprung in the pool and I had to patch that hole and get the water filled back up into the pool. And so the next day, same thing. I can't win. It's like, I think these pools have about a 3-year lifespan, and that's about where we were. We're in our 3rd season of this pool, and I walk out. This time, the rubber ring that you filled with air had deflated, and water was kind of spilling over the top of that. And I thought, well, I'll pump it up with air, and I did that, and it didn't last very long, and I couldn't find the hole, and water's coming out of the pool. And so feeling deflated at that moment, I decided let's just watch all the water run out and be done with this thing because I'm tired of the upkeep. You know where I'm going with this is that a lot of times, a lot of us come into this room feeling deflated. We're feeling that the water is just running out of the pool of our lives. You know, we look at the nation and where it is in its spiritual decline, and we just feel hopeless. A lot of us feel helpless in our marriages, maybe, because it just feels like the water is just draining out and nothing's being replenished, and you feel helpless because of that. Some of us feel deflated as you've watched your children walk away from the church, maybe, or maybe from God, and we just feel that there's no hope, that the water from our pools is just draining away. So last week we talked about King Hezekiah. It kind of brought a glimmer of hope to the nation of Israel, actually to the kingdom of Judah. And he brought about the purification of the temple and purification of the people, and we watched how God blessed that nation because of what Hezekiah had done. And his message was, remember, church is open. Come in, get clean. You know, this is a good time for us. Yet Hezekiah dies, and his 12-year-old son Manasseh takes the throne. 12 years old. And Manasseh rejects his spiritual heritage. How many of you read chapter 17 in the story last week? Very good, Bonnie. Your hand went right. I knew you were going to do that. That's awesome. If you don't have a copy of the message, or the story, by the way, you can go to Berean. What's it called now? Lifeway. You can go to Lifeway now. They got the story on sale for $5 again. Just go up there, and they have plenty in stock as far as I understand right now, and get yourself a copy of that. And for $5, why not? So anyway, we're in chapter 17 of the story. So we read about this King Manasseh, takes the throne at 12 years old, and he rejects his spiritual heritage, and he leads the southern kingdom right back into idol worship. And Manasseh, I think, takes it to an extreme here. We see he sets up all these places to worship Baal again. He sets up these Asherah poles, and he takes it even a step further. We find that he sacrifices his son in the fire to a god. And he even places a carved image in the temple of the Lord, defiling God's house. Manasseh has taken this to a whole new level now. And at this point, God had had enough. And we read chapter 17 of the story, and we see that finally Jerusalem and Judah is taken captive. A new Assyrian king comes, and he leads Manasseh by the nose. I love that verse in 2 Chronicles 33:11. He put a ring in Manasseh's nose and leads him back to Babylon. It's kind of interesting. And then later on, the King Nebuchadnezzar comes to Jerusalem, and for like 20 years, they build these siege ramps against Jerusalem and try to take the city over. And finally, in 586 BC, the Babylonians overtake Jerusalem. They destroy the temple so that a stone is not left on another one. And they take many of Jerusalem's citizens captive. They exile them from the land back to Babylon. And very few people are left behind in the city of Jerusalem. But among them, again, is another X factor, like we talked about with King Hezekiah last week. This X factor is a prophet this time, and his name is Jeremiah. Jeremiah is called by God to continue to preach to the people of Jerusalem and the people of Judah, to get them to return to the Lord, to repent, come back home. And so Jeremiah is out there preaching, but his messages that he preaches, they fall on deaf ears and hardened hearts. The people are not going to listen. In fact, if you read the very first part of Jeremiah, you get the idea. God tells Jeremiah, hey, here's what I want you to do. I want you to go out to preach to these people. And God even tells Jeremiah, but they're not going to listen to you. In fact, they're going to take it a step further, and they're going to fight against you physically. Now he tells them they're not going to overcome you. Don't worry. I got your back, but they're not going to listen to you. Could you imagine what that feels like? Being a preacher in a land where nobody listens to you. That'd be pretty difficult. And that's what Jeremiah is doing. Now, a lot of us have this image in our minds. You know, we think about doomsday prophets. How many of you have this image in your mind? You know, they're the guys that are standing on the corners, waving their Bibles in the air and shouting at the top of their lungs, repent or go to hell. You know, we got that image, right? But that's not Jeremiah. Jeremiah is known, anybody know, he's known as a certain kind of prophet. Do you know what it is? The weeping prophet. He's the crying prophet. He's kind of sensitive kind of guy. And so Jeremiah is out there, he's conversing with the people of Jerusalem, and he's got these tears in his eyes, and he's trying to tell them, hey, you guys need, we need to get back to God. He's not waving his Torah. He's not out there with a scroll, beating people over the heads with it and saying, repent or go to hell. But he's telling them and crying with them and telling them, listen, if you guys don't turn around, God's going to bring destruction, and it's not going to be pretty. So last week, we see what brings the hand of God's blessing in our lives, purity and prayer. But this week, as we read chapter 17, we're seeing what brings the hand of God's wrath, God's judgment. Jeremiah chapter 2, we read this in verses 9 through 13. Jeremiah speaks on God's behalf. God says, therefore I bring charges against you again, declares the Lord. And I will bring charges against your children's children. Cross over to the coasts of Kittim and look. Send to Kedar and observe closely. See if there has been anything like this. Has a nation ever changed its gods? Yet they're not gods at all. You can see what God's getting at. My people have exchanged their glory for worthless idols. Who does this? God is the God of Israel. He's the God of Judah. Who exchanges one God for another? Only the people of Israel, obviously. And God says in verse 12, be appalled at this, O heavens, and shudder with great horror, declares the Lord. My people have committed two sins. They have forsaken me, the spring of living water, and they have dug their own cisterns, broken cisterns that cannot hold water. So God encapsulates all of Israel's sins, all of Judah's sins here. He encapsulates it into one major sin, and that's idolatry. This is what you've done. You've forsaken me, and you're building your own cisterns. You're going after your own things, and basically, essentially, it comes down to idolatry. And we talked a couple weeks ago about how our idols maybe look a little bit differently today than they did back then. Not many of us have carved images sitting on our mantels at home or Asherah poles in the backyard, where we go and bow down before these things. At least I hope we don't. But we talked about how maybe our idols look differently today, that maybe they come in the shape of worry or anxiety or materialism or lust. And so we've replaced maybe carved images for something with something else. And anytime we elevate, we talked about anytime how we elevate something or someone to the level of God, that becomes, or more than God, then that becomes an idol in our lives. And so the question was, what have we elevated in our lives to be equal with God, if anything? So Jeremiah talks about these cisterns that don't hold water, like my pool didn't hold water anymore. He talks about these cisterns that don't hold water. Now, what's a cistern? Well, let me tell you, a well would be where you retrieve water from the ground naturally, it comes up from the ground, where a cistern is something that the people back in the day would dig a hole in the ground and try to collect water from above. It would hold this, it would be like large tanks in the ground holding water. And because the climate was very arid back then, you would see these people of Judah running around digging these cisterns to collect water all the time. They were forever digging these new cisterns, bricking them up, sealing them with some type of mortar or plaster. And so what would happen, holes would form in these cisterns. And so the people would be constantly out there repairing these cisterns. And if they couldn't get them repaired, they'd be digging new ones. So they were always digging, always repairing, and always trying to accumulate water. And God compares their life, this idol worship, with these broken down cisterns. Their false gods had become like their cisterns. They kept coming back to idol worship, but they kept finding it empty or worthless or broken down. They kept ignoring the fact that there was a spring of living water right beside them. All they had to do was go to him. They kept coming back to this idol worship, but found it empty. That's idolatry. Rejecting what God has provided and filling your life with something else. And you might think, oh, this will quench my thirst for a little while. It feels good. It tastes good, whatever. But it never really truly satisfies. In 2012, the media ran a news story. This is what idolatry looks like today. The hotel chain, there was a hotel chain that removed all the Bibles from their rooms. How many of you remember that? A couple of years ago. They removed all these Bibles from their rooms in this hotel chain, and they replaced it with another book, 50 Shades of Grey. A lot of you know what that is. If you don't know what that is, it falls in the genre of erotica, pornographic literature. That's idolatry in America today. That was just a couple years ago, and it's getting worse. But here's what they did. They replaced God's spring of living water, his word, with some broken down cistern. That's idolatry. We reject God's spring of living water and we replace it with our own leaky cisterns, hoping to find satisfaction. Instead of looking to God for comfort, we look to maybe the cistern of food or entertainment. Instead of looking to God for significance and identity, we look to the cistern of career and accomplishments. Instead of looking to God for security, we look to the cistern of money and investments. Instead of looking to God for joy, we look to the cistern of marriage and children. Instead of looking to God for hope, we look to the cistern of politics and legislation. Instead of truth from God, we look to the cistern of pop culture and academic consensus. Instead of looking to God for strength, we look to the cistern of motivational books and self-help seminars. Now, I'm not saying these things are bad. But unfortunately, we've taken these good things, and a lot of us have made them God things. We've replaced them in our lives and made them gods. That's idolatry, and it doesn't work. It just doesn't satisfy. Jesus said this, I have come that they may have life and have it what? More abundantly. More abundantly. You can't find it in an idol. You can't find it in a television show. You can't find it in a retirement account or pleasures of this world or drunkenness. These things are temporary. Jesus is eternal, forever. So Jeremiah, out there crying, tells God's people they've rejected God's living water for their own broken down cisterns. So I want to talk the remainder of the time of what we have together about what it looks like when we try to drink water from our own broken down cisterns. And we may not realize it at the time, but oftentimes I think we do reject God's living water for something else. We trade it for something else. So what are the indicators? How do we know? How do I know that I'm out there maybe chasing the wrong thing? Let me give you a couple things to think through. First, when we drink from a cistern, a broken down cistern, instead of God's living water, we get worn out. We get tired. We get exhausted. We get worn out from all this digging. God makes it a point of saying, you have dug your own cisterns. You have dug your own cisterns. And so my question is, have you ever tried to dig a hole in the ground in the hard dirt? Anybody? It's exhausting, right? At least that's what I'm told. No, I'm not lazy. I've dug holes in the ground. It's not easy. You know, when the ground is hard, you're out there working, and it's exhausting. Imagine how exhausted God's people were trying to dig all these cisterns all the time. First of all, they're out there repairing if they can't get they're building new ones. Archaeologists find many of these old cisterns, broken down cisterns. And so they were getting worn out doing this, if you could imagine that. So my question is, how worn out are you in trying to fill that void in your life? It's exhausting chasing down this stuff and trying to figure out what your purpose is in life when God is right there, the spring of living water. I like how Solomon puts it, all this stuff and money and entertainment and it amounts to nothing but chasing after the wind. So here's your homework assignment today. Hopefully the rain quits. When you get home, go outside and first look up the street, look down the road, make sure nobody's watching, and just start chasing the wind. All right, could you imagine? Now, you probably do okay for the first 20 seconds maybe, you're not going to catch it, of course. You're going to get worn out pretty quickly chasing the wind. That's what Solomon says. Chasing all this stuff in this life, it's just chasing the wind. Jeremiah says it's like digging your own cisterns, these broken down cisterns. It's no good. Jesus, God, is the spring of living water. All right, so we get worn out. What cisterns have you been digging? How have you traded God in your life? From what are you worn out? Another indicator that maybe you're drinking from a broken down cistern instead of God's spring of living water is this. We get a bitter aftertaste. There's a bitter aftertaste that comes with these broken down cisterns, with chasing false gods. And the water in these cisterns that the Israelites and people of Judah would build, they would become stagnant after a while. Because the air was very dry, and because the water supply was very low and inadequate, they would have to scoop the water off the bottom of these cisterns. Now, if you've had a pool and you've kind of let your pool sit around for a little while, you get kind of this film. I mean, it's gross on the bottom, like this algae grows on it. It's pretty gross. And sometimes these people would have to drink that water, and you can imagine the taste, the initial taste, but then the aftertaste. It wouldn't be that great. But what's the aftertaste that we're getting from these quote, pleasures in life? In verse 19 of Jeremiah chapter 2, God says this: your wickedness will punish you. Your backsliding will rebuke you. Consider then and realize how evil and what? Bitter. How bitter it is for you when you forsake the Lord your God and have no awe of me, declares the Lord Almighty. The aftertaste that these things in this life leave in our mouths is the punishment that comes with it. When we turn to something or someone other than Jesus Christ, it leaves a bad taste in our mouths. Oh, it might taste good at first. It might feel good at first. It might feel new and you feel happy. But after a while, it just doesn't taste good anymore. And it starts to lead to maybe some bad things in your life. Maybe your marriage starts to fall apart. Maybe disease sneaks into your body. Maybe you find yourself drowning in debt. And you feel enwrapped in God's punishment because of the bad things you've done in your life in trying to find pleasure in everything else except God. I don't know what that looks like for you, but God our Father says it's horrifying to watch this, for people to suffer through their evil. He says, be appalled at this, O heavens, and shudder with great horror. Jeremiah 2:12. Be appalled. Imagine this. Imagine putting a thick, juicy filet mignon in front of your children. And all they want to do is sit there and gnaw on their beef jerky. Wouldn't that be appalling? I mean, come on. You got a nice, thick, juicy steak right in front of you, and you just want to sit there and chew on your beef jerky. That wouldn't make sense at all. It would be appalling. How often do we appall God trying to taste things in this life rather than tasting the life God offers? You know, God, through Jesus Christ, He offers us peace and joy and security and strength and purpose. But we look back at God from time to time, we say, no, that's all right, I got my beef jerky. Crazy. And I know some of you you're watching some of your kids go through this right now. You know, you're King Hezekiah. You're trying to live life properly. You're trying to purify the temple. And some of your kids are out there, they're running around like King Manasseh, chasing after all this other stuff. And they're trying to drink from their own cisterns. I want you to look at these statistics from the American Religious Identification Survey. Write these in your notes. It was a study done on those who claim to have no faith, those who have basically walked away from God or never had faith in God or what have you. But look at these statistics. Those who claim no faith, in 1990, the total population out of the United States of America was 8.1%. That's almost doubled. In 2010, it was 15%. 15% of America claim no faith. The largest group of those who claim no faith are ages 18 to 29. Look around you. Raise your hand if you're between ages 18 and 29. I'll put mine down. Yeah, Joe. All right. I mean, we have a few. Those who claim no faith, 73% grew up in a Christian home. 73% grew up in a Christian home. 63% of those who claim no faith are deconverts. In other words, they grew up in the church, they had some kind of faith, that kind of thing, but they've totally turned away from following God and said, I'm done. George Barna says that 80% of those reared in the church will be disengaged from their faith by the age of 29. 80%. We got some issues going on out there. And I can just imagine if Jeremiah were here today, he would say, hey guys, wake up. Come back. A mom named Lisa wrote a letter to her prodigal son. I think it captures how God feels. I want to read this letter to you. She writes this. She says, I remember a boy who was so eager to call me mama and who gave spontaneous hugs and kisses. You loved to eat any and all of my food and made me feel like I was the best cook in the world. I remember your stubbornness and hoped that you would use it to change your world, but instead it's changed you. And we miss you, the real you, the one who is strong for the weak and makes everyone else feel safe. I can't help but wonder if I'm somehow to blame for the change of direction you've made as of late. Was I too strict? Was I not strict enough? Did I show you the love and grace that is Jesus? Was I just too much of a hypocrite? Then I start to figure out what I would do differently if I had the chance. I would affirm you more and correct you less. Would I discipline you and guide you more gently? I realize I'm trying to rewrite the past, and that's something that can never be done, no matter how hard I try. And I remember that I'm to forget those things which are behind and strain toward what is ahead. But next, I start to worry about the now. and where are you and what you're doing. And I stare at the glow of the digital alarm clock in my room and wonder who you're with at 1:30 in the morning and why you're not answering your phone or your text. But here, the Comforter draws me near and whispers that I'm to be anxious for nothing. You see, dear heart, you don't belong to me. You never have. Your mommy and your daddy gave you back to God. And I believe that He has a plan for your future, that He will finish what He started in you. And so with this letter I write to you that you may never, this letter that you may never see, I pray that you know one thing. It's very important. I pray that you know that my arms are wide open for your return. Anytime you're ready, no matter what you've done, we'll face it together because His arms are ready too. He awaits your return. He will be dancing and spinning and celebrating with the best of them. He misses you more than I do. He paid a great price to know you, and every day that you're away seems like an eternity. So make haste, my son. We're waiting. Daddy, Jesus, and I. We are fattening the calf and preparing the party. We are standing in the yard, shielding our eyes from the sun, hoping to catch a glimpse of you coming over the horizon. The day cannot come soon enough. Arms always open, Mama. And here we are, and Jeremiah pleading with the people of Judah, just come back home. Just come back. Repent of these things. Have nothing to do with these broken down cisterns. And Jeremiah saying on behalf of God, saying, find what you're looking for in me. That's it. Lastly, you know you're drinking from a broken down cistern instead of God's spring of living water because you never feel satisfied. You never feel satisfied. God's people kept digging these new cisterns because their old ones kept breaking down. And you keep trying new things because the old stuff doesn't work out too well, right? Like Solomon, you try entertainment, that doesn't work. You try possessions, but that doesn't work. You try relationship after relationship, but that doesn't work. You try wealth, but that doesn't work. And you keep coming to these different things in life, and each attempt only leads to bigger and bigger holes in your cistern. They're broken down cisterns. And get this, in less than 600 years, Jesus would show up in Judah. He would go to a town called Samaria and sit down by a well and converse with a woman who had dug for herself at least six cisterns, 5 husbands that she had passed through, and a sixth guy that she was living with but was currently not her husband. Jesus sits down next to her and he tells this unsatisfied woman in John 10, verse 10, if you knew the gift of God and who it is that asks you for a drink, you would have asked him and he would have given you living water. In verse 14, he says, but whoever drinks the water I give him will never thirst. Indeed, the water I give him will become in him a spring of water welling up to eternal life. That's what Jesus has to offer. He is the spring of living water. Now, I don't know this woman at the well, but I think you and I meet her maybe on a daily basis. We might be sitting next to her this morning. She's the one trying to find satisfaction at the bar or in her savings account or in her possessions. She's the one out there digging her own cisterns in the men who might give her hope or might give her things that might quench her thirst, but she's worn out. The taste in her mouth is stale, and she's unsatisfied with her life. You and I run into her every day, and the whole time, there is a spring of living water right beside her. Can we point her to it? And maybe some of you need to be pointed to it this morning. You need Jesus in your life. He's the spring of living water, and it's time to come to him.